I'm so excited to have Aaron Ezra here. He's chairman of Plan A Technologies, founded a bunch of companies. And Aaron posted on LinkedIn after a job interview. It wasn't your job interview, right, Aaron?
Correct. I was interviewing someone else. Yeah.
Right. So you're the head of the company, or and this is probably a pretty high stakes interview with you, right?
Yes, for that candidate, it would be a high stakes interview. I'd be the final round, interviewer for most of the folks.
So can you share what your post was? Because I'd love to hear it from you.
Yeah, the post essentially was just saying, that very often when we have folks who come and interview for a job, we purposely try to ask them harder and harder questions to kind of understand a limit of their knowledge, to understand, all right, here's what this person knows, and then here's the universe of things that this person doesn't know. And so inevitably in that process, you eventually hit a ceiling of an area where that person's like, gosh, I just don't know that. And most of the people who are presented with that question either say, sorry, I don't know, or they say, well, I think, what you really want to take a look at is Angular and JavaScript and React are actually related. And they just start jabbering on and trying to throw on a whole lot of language that maybe is relevant, maybe is coherent, maybe it's not. And this candidate was especially impressive because he said, look, I don't know, which, okay, that's fine. But then he went on to explain it with great specificity exactly how he goes about finding that answer. So he said, I go to Stack Overflow. These are the chat rooms that I go to. Here are the other resources that I use on Google. And he actually walked us through, he shared a screen and he walked us through how he would find an answer to that question, if we presented that with him in a real world scenario. So we were really impressed and we said, hey man, that's pretty awesome. We'd like to offer you the job. And so it worked out.
I just love it. Like he didn't know the answer, but instead of letting that be a weakness, he showed you how he finds answers.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I wish more folks would do that.
Were you surprised how this resonated?
Yeah. There's actually over 100,000 likes and over 8.5 million views, which
Oh my
is
gosh.
really crazy. Yeah. So that's definitely the most popular thing I've ever written on LinkedIn and probably seen by more people than anything I've ever written before or since. But it was great. It was great to see the reaction. I got a lot of really nice messages from folks who were saying like, yeah, I find this inspiring. And so, it made me feel great. I was very surprised. It was not intentional. And certainly it was really, heartwarming to see.
It really struck a nerve. And then what I did is I took your post and then I shared a TikTok that just said, hey, if you don't know the answer, like here's a great way to go about it. And then that got like over 400,000 views and lots of comments. And then I reached out to you and you were kind enough to say, hey man, let's talk for a few minutes, which thanks for doing that. Like, that's really
Oh yeah, of
nice.
course, of course. No, thanks for reaching out in the first place. This is a topic that is as near and dear to me. As somebody who does a lot of interviews with folks on a day-to-day basis, I love the fact that you're getting the message out to help people really hone their skills and understand how to present themselves in a more effective way.
Yeah. It triggered a lot of different responses. And I don't know if you were able to look at any of the comments from the original TikTok post. Did you get to kind of click through a little bit?
I did see some of them. Yeah. So it was great. It was great to see those reactions. It made me really, really happy.
Did any of them, strike you as interesting, funny? Like, did anything stand out? Because I have a couple that I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, no, please. Why don't I let you take the lead with that? Sure. Absolutely.
Okay, so one of my favorite comments is being LinkedIn. I'd say this story has an 80% chance of being made up just for the clout.
Uh, no, it is not. It is not a made up story. It's a real story. I actually asked the guy if it was okay if I shared his profile, but he was a little embarrassed and was like, well, I didn't know the answer, man. I don't want to, please don't emphasize that. I don't want to be known as the guy who didn't know. Yeah, but it is a real story.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I love that he's all of a sudden embarrassed because he doesn't want to be the guy who doesn't know, but he's the guy who like
Yeah.
got the job. I mean,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
more people can
Yeah.
connect with him than anybody because there's something so powerful about not knowing but wanting to know. So, all right, cool. I got another comment. Uh, Someone said lies. this may have worked in that scenario because they already liked him, but typical interview, it won't work. Thoughts?
So, I think had this candidate not been answering other questions well, had he not shown initiative, had he not been, well spoken and clear in his answers, had he not shown real expertise in other areas, had he just kind of come in and been like, "Yo, I don't know, man, but here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to look it up on Google." Yeah, of course. There's no way. There's no way we're going to hire somebody like that. We actually hire less than 3% of the people who apply to work at Plan A Technologies. So the vast majority of the people don't make it. But what I think I was trying to convey here is that, look, if there is somebody who doesn't know the answer, you don't need to know everything. You certainly don't need to be perfect. You do need to know some things, and you do need to show that you're willing to go above and beyond. And, if you have that combination of stuff, then that can certainly work.
Okay, very helpful. Another comment, this would never in caps happen at FANG, FAANG acronym. They have straight A students only.
Well, I would say that, I can only speak for what we do. And I have certainly a lot of friends who work at those companies as well. Yes, they put people through very, very difficult technical interviews. We also put people through very difficult technical interviews as well. It is a multi-interview, multi-stage process where we're asking scenario-based questions, hypothetical questions. We go really, really deep on various levels of technical expertise. And the people who we have working with us have been the superstars at the companies where they were previously. But I would say that, a lot of larger companies, regardless of which company that is, will have, a series of checklists essentially, and the person needs to hit certain areas. We also have certain areas that we need somebody to know. If we're hiring a, .NET developer and they don't know the difference between stack and heap, and they don't know solid design principles, that person's probably not going to make it in. But we don't have a checklist that's so fixed where we say, look, if you don't hit every single one of these things, you're out. Because I think that is that's short-sighted. So we try to be flexible. We have the agility as a smaller company to be able to really use our best judgment when chatting with these folks.
And I think it's really interesting when somebody says this wouldn't happen here, and there are those 5 companies that people are more familiar with. But the thing is, what you do is so exceptional, and your background and the work you do, and having that narrow vision, I think sometimes limits students' ability to see where they can get the most valuable experiences.
Yeah, and I would just encourage, new grads, especially since I know you talk to a lot of those folks, to really be very open-minded. It's certainly great to work at a big company like that. You get great experience, you have amazing resources, but very often working at a smaller technology company can give you a lot more hands-on experience to a much broader range of experiences. So not only do you kind of get to do more, but you get to see many, many more scenarios. One of the things that's fun about a company like Plan A Technologies that I own is that the company is working in many, many different fields with many, many different kinds of companies, many different kinds of technologies. So certainly it's great to work at a product company where you get to know every single thing about that product, or at least your slice of that product. But getting to work at a services company where you get to see many, many different kinds of tech stacks is really exciting, and I think gives you a really terrific foundation.
Yeah, and the idea that someone was interviewing with you, and you were in that room, and you're that final interview when you founded 2 companies, or been sold 2 other companies before this,
Yeah.
in some really cool spaces, and you have such a wide range of knowledge, and then somebody is in that space interviewing and meeting with you. There's something really important and powerful about that. Let me ask you this: after, like, that's that person you hired, I know how many. Let me ask you this: how large is the company right now, Plan A?
So we have several hundred people, and the people that we have are in South America and Central America. They're in Nigeria, they're in Moldova, they're in Turkey. So really all, and United States, of course, and Canada. So all over the place. We've got kind of a mini United Nations. It's really fun getting the whole gang together and seeing people from all over the world speaking different languages.
That's amazing. That's so cool. And then that's that student or that person you hired.
Yeah.
Will that person interact with you? Can that person interact with you if they have questions? Are you accessible?
Yeah, we try to. What we do is we set up a mentor program at Plan A. So all new folks who come in get a resource manager, and that resource manager is kind of within their area of expertise and is there to give them advice on a day-to-day basis, talk about their longer-term career, talk about the challenges they may be having on the individual projects. And then people can also request to have one-on-one sessions with other executives at the company, whether it's myself or some of the other people that we have on the team. And in doing so, we try to make sure that everyone has multiple outlets to go to. We also, on Fridays, we do like a tech talk where we get everybody together and we just talk in real depth about one technology and what it is and why it's important, or why we think it's on its way out, or what some of the implications might be. And then we also talk about kind of the business of technology as well. One of the things that a lot of engineers really don't get exposed to is often is, all right, I know how to build this sucker, but then what happens? And so a lot of them really find it interesting when we start talking about how companies price technologies, how they sell those technologies, how they, design the front end of it, if it's a back end engineer, or the back end, if it's a front end engineer. So we try to give everybody a very holistic perspective of what's going on.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like a really nurturing environment, a community where you can grow and learn. And the mentoring program makes it easy to not know answers.
That's the word I always use. I say we think of ourselves as a community where it's unlike a family where you're stuck with your family. In a community, people are volunteering to be there. They want to be there. They're choosing to be there every day. And we're supportive of each other. I make sure that there's never any internal competition at all. There's plenty of external competition. And so everybody who comes into that community gets a chance to have a lot of different resources supporting them.
I can feel that. I mean, just the fact that you're willing to take the time to share this, I mean, it really says so much about what's important to you. And I'm sure the energy that's part of working at Plan A. I have one last question, or it's like a
Sure.
series, because I want to
Sure.
do like a speed round, because I know there are a lot of engineers out there who are really nervous when it comes to sitting in a room and communicating and being able to articulate what's important to them and to also make a positive impression, because they don't really teach a lot of that in college. And we were touching on that. So just to kind of make it really easy, because I know a lot of engineers like numbers and sequence. So what I'd like to do is just do 5 quick interview tips for engineers. Okay.
Cool.
So the first one is, what is the best way for an engineer to prepare for a job interview?
So I think there are a few things to be done to prepare. First, understand the technologies that the company is using. So if it is a Node.js backend shop and that's what you need to know, make sure you review everything about that. Versus if it's a C# or Python or whatever, on the software side, at least, make sure you understand what the technologies are. Two, prepare yourself for a live coding test. Not all companies do this, but this is one of the things that really flusters a lot of engineers. Some groups will talk to you and just say, hey, tell me about this. How would you do that? Others will be like, all right, share your screen. And now we're going to give you a challenge, and we need you to actually type code in front of us so we can see you doing that. A lot of the engineers are like, whoa, man, I've never done that before. And they completely freak out. And it shakes the confidence of the interviewer significantly. So we do it for some positions, not all positions. But that's something that they should be prepared for. And then they should also just have some questions prepared. One of the things that I think a lot of people, a good engineer asks questions. A good engineer is a problem solver. And it's always surprising to me sometimes when we're interviewing folks and we're like, all right, so do you have any other questions about the position? And they're like, nope. It's like, no, 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 no. You're supposed to show your curiosity, man. Please do it. So yeah.
Right. Those are all really helpful when it comes to the live coding, because I can imagine someone hearing this and starting to sweat, like, oh my gosh, how does an applicant even know if that's going to be part of the process?
I think it's totally fair when you're talking to the HR person in your kind of first round interview to say, should I be ready for a live coding test? Is there anything like that that I should be prepared for? And they should let you know most of the time.
Wonderful. And then how many rounds of interviews should an applicant expect to go through?
It's dramatically different for different organizations. I am personally a firm believer that, especially in an aggressive market, you want to minimize the rounds of interviewing. We try to get everything done in 2 or 3 rounds, if at all possible. Sometimes we can even do it in 1, but just be aware that many times, there are over a dozen rounds of interviews, because what will happen is they'll say, look, we need to bring in people from many different departments. And so don't feel like that company's being a jerk. It's probably just how they have to do it, unfortunately.
Okay. And then what is a good question for an applicant to ask if they want to come prepared and be interested? Is there a question that someone's asked, you're like, it's a good one, or can you kind of guide them?
Yeah, I think asking things like, what stage is the project at that I'll be working on? How far along are we? Asking things like, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've run into so far in the development of this, this initiative, whatever it is? How are you planning on getting past that? Things like, what are the skills that I could bring to the table that would be most helpful for you? And of course, just asking the basics of like, who am I going to be working with? The logistics of how the whole thing is going to unfold.
Those are great. Those are so helpful. This is so unbelievably helpful. What about some red flags when someone walks into an interview or you hear somebody talk about an interview? Can you share some of those?
Well, probably the biggest red flag, which happens a lot in the world of Zoom and Google Meet interviews, is we will frequently ask questions where, the person will be like, hey, so tell me about this. And the person will be like, okay. And they're quickly typing and trying to Google and figure out the answer to the question. And then they'll start like awkwardly reading what they're half Googling. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's very obvious to the interviewer when that's happening. And it is a big red flag. Another big red flag is when the person just starts saying a lot of things that are just patently untrue. Very often we'll encounter people who are used to being really, really bright. They're used to being the smartest engineer around. And then they're not as used to being around much more senior engineers, especially if it's a new grad. So the person will just start throwing in a lot of jargon and using terms incorrectly and talking about things that don't make sense. And so that's another big red flag. And then I think, probably one of the biggest things that comes up on top of those is that there are a lot of engineers who know what to do in a certain situation. So they're like, if X happens, I must do Y. However, there's often a lack of deeper understanding of how the technologies fit together and why they need to do this if a certain thing occurs. And so there's a lot of people who know the what to do, but they don't know why they need to do that. And that's another deeper red flag that we often come across.
Yeah. So the larger concept of understanding your function and how it contributes to the larger, the success, the greater good. So you're not just a cog, you're part of something much more.
That's right. And showing that you have a deeper understanding of how the different technologies all fit together and work together. And that's a really, really helpful skill.
And just to clear that up, when the part about if you're talking to someone and they're Googling something, that's different than not knowing the answer and being transparent.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes. I'm glad you brought that up. So it's fine if you say, I don't know, but here's what I'm going to do to find out. totally cool. Now you're being honest. But if you say like, oh yeah, sure, I know that, and now you're just quickly trying to read something from Wikipedia that you just are reading out loud to me, it's like, just say you don't know. Don't, be honest, because that's really critical.
Right. And then finally, when a job interview is complete and the applicant is corresponding, is there a best way to do this? Is it a thank you note? Is it, what is the best way to leave you with the best impression?
Yeah, I think a thank you note is wonderful. It's old school. Very, very few candidates do it anymore. I always used to do it when I was interviewing back when I was a new grad. But I think it's a really, really classy touch to something great to do. One of the things that sometimes happens is somebody will interview for a position, and we have 40 applicants for 2 positions, for instance. And maybe this person was number 3 or number 4 on the list. They were good, but we've just found somebody who was a little bit better. One of the great things to do is just stay in touch with those recruiters. And every now and then say like, hey, by the way, now I've also met, I know before I only knew Azure Cloud. Now I've also got a Google Cloud certification, or now I've also learned a lot more about this other technology. And just sharing regular updates with the recruiters is something that they can then update your resume. They can stay in touch. You'll be a little bit more top of mind. You don't want to overwhelm them and be like emailing them every week, but every 4 or 5 months, sending a little note with a, that says something like, I'm still really interested. If you have something else that opens up over there, here's some new technologies or new certifications I've received. That's a great way to potentially get a second bite at the apple.
So when you get rejected, or if somebody gets rejected, instead of taking it personally, is understanding that if you got as far as you were able to go, there's a lot of value there. So stay in touch.
Yeah.
Have you ever hired someone who didn't get the job the first time, who stayed in touch?
Oh, I was on a call right before I chatted with you with some of our recruiters, and we're making an offer to one of those people today. We do that every single week. So it's very, very, very common. And again, a lot of people just think, oh, I didn't get the job, they don't want me for anything. Well, no, that particular role wasn't the best fit, but there's another role that could be more appropriate, or we're constantly getting new roles opening up all the time. And so that's a really, really important thing to do to stay in touch and keep a positive relationship and dialogue going.
That's great. I'm obsessed with rejection. It's like, I just think people don't understand it, and they just think it's about them, but there are so many other factors. So thanks just for explaining that, because I think
Absolutely,
a lot of engineers, a lot of people struggle, but I think sometimes engineers, when it comes to, the social and emotional nuances, sometimes that can be hard. I don't want to generalize, but I think that sometimes that can be challenging. I just had one more thought, because you're so interesting, and I think it'd be so cool to work for you, or to work with you as part of the community. How does a student apply? Do they go to their career center? Do they reach out to the company? Like, what's the best way if someone's like, Plan A Technology, I want to be a part of this community?
Yeah, I think, well, certainly for us, we have, if you just email your resume to careers@planatechnologies.com, we review every resume that comes in, and we have a little job listing site as well, which you can find on our website at planatechnologies.com. But in addition to that, when the larger question you're asking, I think that going to career fairs or virtual career fairs now in a post-COVID age is always a great one. Applying directly on the website's a great one. Looking online at LinkedIn, for instance, and finding some of the recruiters who are over there. I wouldn't take your resume and send it to like 5 different recruiters, because that actually can jam up the system a little bit in a lot of organizations, where, especially for bigger companies that have 100,000 people or whatever, if there are different recruiters who are like, well, no, this is my candidate, I'll forget it. Like, they get upset with that. But In general, reaching out to a recruiter, if you don't hear anything after 2 months, reaching out to another recruiter over there, reaching out to another recruiter, slowly kind of pacing it out isn't a bad thing. Through those channels, you should be able to get in touch with people. The other thing I would say too is, one of the overlooked things to do is if there's anyone who happens to know someone who already works there. So and it doesn't have to be an engineer, like it could be somebody in marketing or somebody in operations or whatever. But if you have an employee or know an employee over there who's willing to be a champion for you, then that holds a lot more weight. If there's a certain company that you've always wanted to work at, and you can get somebody inside that company who's willing to say, tell you what, let me send your resume to our recruiter. That's a much better way to potentially get into that organization.
That's great. This is also valuable. I kept you way longer than I said I was.
No, it's fun. It's fun.
I really appreciate it. I mean, because I know so many students struggle with this. And then the very last question, and then I'm going to wrap up for sure. I keep saying that. You're not going to believe me. You're not going to believe me. I promise. When should someone start looking at these positions? Like if you're a junior in college, or if you're a really aggressive freshman who's like a crazy coder, like, is it okay to reach out? When is the right time?
So my advice to college students would be to keep an eye on some of the companies that you're interested in. Some of them have internship programs. You can apply to a few of those. Many of them don't, but that's okay. The most important thing I think you can do is to take the initiative to learn one or two topics in great depth, because many college grads have only a very, very, very surface level of understanding of different technologies. And so if you take the initiative to go deep on one or two subjects, you create something like, hey, you know what? I built this game. Or I went and built this app that allows people to register for something regarding water conservation. That was one of the things I just saw recently. People will build these special projects on their own that's not assigned to them by a professor, that they created, that they came up with. And then that's something you can put on GitHub. That's something you can brag about. You can say, look, I learned about this and this and this and this and this. And those are the kinds of things that help differentiate you from the rest of the folks, because then you're able to say, look, nobody told me to do this. I went and I learned how to do this stuff on my own. And that's the same kind of thing that I'm going to do. That's the same attitude I'm going to bring when I come to work for you.
I love it. It's hire yourself before anybody hires you.
Absolutely.
Know those people who match with your skill set, what you've done. It's not tell me what you're going to do. It's, oh, I want to show you what I did. And I'd love to work with you and collaborate. And that's so exciting, right? Like that's
100%.
I love that. That's great. This is wonderful. Hey, this was better than I could even possibly imagine. You gave me such great stuff that these engineering students are going to love. So thanks. Have the best week. Appreciate it.